of people coming, but we've got a good group already here, and I don't think we need to wait before we start. So first of all, thank you all for being here. Some of you have been in other sessions already in the last couple of days, or some of you, this is the first one. So welcome or welcome back. We've got another round of questions and discussion for you today. Before we get to that though, we also have something that we'd like to present to you, just some of the results coming out of the project. And our colleague Anastasia, who is in Finland, will be presenting the analysis of regulations and governance models. So we'll spend just a few minutes on that, just to sort of bring you up to speed on where we are. Maybe before we get to that though, a quick round of introductions would be good. Just who you are and what organization you're from would be super, just so everybody knows who they're talking to, and then we'll jump right in. Yannick, do you want to start?
I can start, yes. So my name is Yannick Busse. I am working at the UITP, which is the International Association of Public Transport. There I'm working in the Mobility Governance Unit, and I'm the coordinator of the Gecko project.
Thank you. Tommaso, you're on my other side here, at least on my view. We've got a blank screen and nothing happening there. We'll see if he's back in a minute. I'll jump over to Anastasia.
Hi, my name is Anastasia Smirkova. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Team University in Finland, and I'm working within Gecko consortium, and I will be presenting some of the results from the project later today.
Thank you. Caroline?
Yes, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Caroline Busquet. I'm from Absiski, which is an innovation consulting company, and I'm working also on the Gecko project.
Thank you. Antoine, you're next on my screen.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Antoine Verhulst. I'm the data analyst and scientist at Blau Alliance, which is an application part of the BlaBlaCar group that is focusing on commuting carpooling, so short distance homework carpooling, active in France. Yeah, and thank you, Bonnie, for inviting me. Very happy to be here.
Thank you. Christophe.
Morning, everybody. So my name is Christophe Arnaud. I'm the CEO of Blue Systems. It's a subsidiary of the group Bolloré, and we are providing cities with a data aggregation platform that allowing cities to monitor in real time all their MSPs and also to regulate them.
Thank you. Pasquale, you're next here for me.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pasquale Cancellara. I work for Polis Network, a network of cities and regions focusing on transport innovation, and we are partner of the Gecko project.
Thank you. Sergio.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Sergio Fernandez. I work for EMT Madrid, the public transport operator. I am in charge of international projects, the International Collaboration Projects Department, that's the right name. And yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you. Chrisia, you're next for me.
Everyone, I'm Krisha Solheim. I'm Managing Director for Nextbike UK. We're the subsidiary of Nextbike GmbH, a German bike share company.
Thanks. Giles, also in London.
Again, I am Giles Bailey. I'm based in London. Today I'm here on behalf of the Travel Spirit Foundation, which is a foundation around open ecosystems, but you'll probably see me involved in lots of other things around new mobility around Europe. But great to be here.
Thanks. Andrew, nice to see you again.
Hi, Bonnie. Yeah, Andrew Pickford. So I'm calling from Hong Kong. I'm associate partner at EY Transactions in Hong Kong, focused on technical advisory in surface transport, mainly focused on data sharing, smart mobility, e-mobility, electronic toll collection, digital twinning, and all those other things around ITS.
Thank you. Marco, I see you've just appeared there. And you're muted for the moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry for the delay. I'm Marco from Switzerland, Bernmobil. This is the public transport operator of the city of Bern.
Nice you could join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marisa.
Hello, everybody. This is Marisa Mehta, project manager in Fit Consulting and also part of the Gecko project.
Thank you. Lewis in Singapore.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon here in Asia. All right, I'm Louis Chen. I'm from this company called Car Club. We have been running car sharing since 1997. We are also involved a little bit on the autonomous vehicles itself. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Vasilis?
Hello, I'm Vasilis Agridas. I'm working for Airbus Urban Mobility, and I'm here mainly as my role of leading the initiative Cities Community and the work we do with the cities to influence regulatory frameworks.
Thank you. And I think the last one I have here is Marusha.
Hello, everyone. This is Marusha from Corte. We're a confederation bringing together organizations in road transport enforcement, and we take part in the Gecko project.
Thank you very much. And with that, I think I will turn it directly over to Anastasia to give us a brief presentation, and then we'll go
Maybe
from
we
there.
could just circle back. I see Tommaso has joined us.
Tommaso,
Yes,
quick introduction.
I was answering the phone, so I missed the roundtable. Sorry. My name is Tommaso Bonino from Bologna, Italy. I work for SRM, a company who awards services, mobility services within the Bologna metropolitan area. And by, let's say, invitation from Yannick, I'm taking part in this project with you.
Glad you could join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Anastasia, can we turn it over to you?
Yes. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. So I'm gonna take a few minutes to present you some of the results from Gecko project. Maybe some things will be familiar to some of you because this is kind of the part of the work that we have been working on since the start of the project. So we try to get a good overview of what are the different governance models and regulatory responses for mobility innovations, in mostly focusing on Europe, but also looking at some interesting examples from the rest of the world. And now we have released the final analysis of regulatory responses and governance models, which you should be able to find on Gecko website. And I'm going to present some interesting findings from there, although there is quite a lot of information in the report, and kind of this is in a pitch. So if you would be interested in something in particular, you can go to the website and check this 100-page report that we have. So in this report, we try to look at the governance of mobility innovations kind of from different angles. So first we start by looking at how mobility innovations are governed at different levels. So what kinds of instruments are used at international, European Union, national and local level, what kind of aspects are governed at these levels, and kind of, what's more natural to govern at the international level, for instance, and which aspects are more reasonable to govern at local level. Then we also provide a review of different approaches and governance models that have been applied, or also kind of there are some proposals for which governance models would be more suitable for kind of trying to govern the multitude of different mobility innovations, which kind of can sometimes have conflicting kind of interests and business models behind them. And then in the second half of the report, we make case studies of particular innovations and how they are governed at different level, and kind of which specific regulations or other governance tools are applicable to them. So there we look at 4 main groups of mobility innovations: connected, cooperative, and automated mobility, which includes autonomous cars, or like autonomous shuttles, and mobility based on this technology, but also we review, for instance, urban air mobility and drone operations for delivering goods. Then we look at intelligent transport systems and network and traffic management, few innovations in that category. Then we specifically look at mobility as a service, how it's governed, and I will use it as an example in this presentation to show how we analyze these case studies. And finally, we look at a number of shared on-demand micromobility solutions, car sharing, carpooling, e-scooter and bike sharing, and so on. So when we have looked at how the different innovations are governed at different levels, and well, it's kind of important to note here, I mean, I won't go into all the kind of different regulations, but important to show that, for instance, at international level, first of all, there are a number of forums for discussion, for kind of attempting to harmonize and standardize different aspects of mobility innovations. So naturally, such topics as kind of safety of road traffic, they are governed at international level, starting from there. Most of the regulations, they already exist, or kind of the governance tools. Some relate more to kind of hard governance, like binding rules, but not too many at the international level, of course. But mostly it's soft governance, like setting policy together and having these think tanks to discuss kind of how to address the new innovations and technologies that are changing the landscape in mobility sector. One kind of interesting example to bring up at the international level is probably that even though the Vienna Convention has been kind of around for many, many years, it required some updates when autonomous cars entered the market. So then the main work was not about coming up with some new kind of conventions, but really to ensure that the existing conventions do not kind of stop the implementation of the innovation, but ensures that it's kind of safely implemented and kind of does not pose any safety concerns. So then at the European Union level, there are various directives and regulations that set kind of more general requirements. They are not specific. Usually they are not specific to any innovation in particular, but they address such issues like platforms, which are relevant for many innovations, including mobility as a service or autonomous operations. Then there is some regulations regarding taxation that kind of can really either help implement certain innovations or really kind of create challenges for that. Policy at European Union level is also important, and kind of there, for instance, the recent strategy for sustainable and smart mobility as part of the Green Deal also kind of sets some direction for different mobility innovations that can contribute to this sustainable smart mobility. Also, there are different financial instruments at European Union level, like, for instance, Connecting Europe facility. And then some issues are addressed more at national and local level, and that kind of makes sense because the, let's say, implementation and kind of how different innovations will be implemented at local level kind of has to be decided based on the local circumstances. So issues like licensing different operators or subsidizing one or another mobility service, that's kind of decided at national, local level. Okay. Another interesting kind of observation finding that we have in this report concerns that the fact that the different governance models are more or less applicable depending on kind of the maturity of the innovation in question. So like when if the innovation is just kind of entering the market and there is kind of a good time to define the different norms and standards related to it. It's also especially crucial for the innovations that kind of are based, for instance, on some technological advancements, and it's not yet clear, you know, is it a safe service, kind of what should be the requirements to ensure its safety and so on. So then, for example, more collaborative approach, you know, to kind of devise the standards together, kind of with public and private parties, and to kind of ensure that policy objectives are kind of accepted by the different social providers, that makes more sense. Then at kind of a later stage, there is the time for experimentation of technology and service, and there are maybe a different set of governance models and tools that could be applied. So there could be binding rules to kind of just allow experimentation and pilots, regulatory sandboxes kind of to test the solution and understand kind of what are the impacts, what needs to be regulated. Market approach can be used to select which operators are allowed to participate in this experimentation. But what kind of we observed also with some innovations, they entered the market so kind of rapidly that there was more kind of a reactive approach in a way to just kind of control, you know, what's going on and trying to limit the negative impacts if they were appearing. So, well, as an example of e-scooters, for example, you know, it was necessary to apply market approach to limit the number of operators, you know, set a cap on fleets for other solutions and so on. Okay. Just very briefly, I will kind of try to explain how we analyze the different case studies, taking the example of mobility as a service. So first of all, we kind of started by outlining what are the different aspects that might require governance intervention, and or like it has been seen that they required and there was some governance intervention. So for mobility as a service, it's kind of on the one hand, if it's seen as a solution to kind of alleviating the local transportation problems, then there are different kind of aspects and motivation to promote it, to try to embed it smoothly in the kind of local transportation system, and kind of help deploy this intermodal transportation. But on the other side kind of the governance, it's also important to ensure the transparency and fairness of service provision, to protect the users' interests in that, to ensure fair competition, to kind of clarify what's the liability in case of, for instance, kind of wrong data provision that will reduce the quality of the whole service, kind of who's liable for that, so on. So, and then we analyzed what are the different governance tools or instruments used at the different levels for this particular innovation. So in case of mobility as a service, we could say that well, first of all, there is nothing really on international level. This is not that kind of innovation that kind of requires too much standardization or kind of making agreements at the international level. But at European Union level, first of all, there are policies to promote the implementation of mobility as a service, like it's included as kind of one of the types of solutions for sustainable and smart mobility. There are different directives to promote or kind of to set different kind of requirements for intermodal transportation, which includes how to ensure data interoperability and data sharing, which is so crucial for mobility as a service. Then the regulations regarding platforms also appear to be important for mobility as a service. Like it's not kind of specific for this innovation, but it applies. At the national level, there are examples like from Finland, for example. There is an updated Act on Transport Services that kind of forces mobility operators to share at least a certain amount of data, which can then be used by different mobility as a service kind of platform providers. Or then there could be more specific kind of targeted instruments like framework agreement in the Netherlands for kind of to launch mass projects in the country. The idea is to create a standardized approach so that kind of later on the scale can be scaled up for the whole country, so that, you know, this mass solution is not kind of really customized to each location, so that there are kind of no system benefits. And then at local level, of course, there are pilots and kind of the need to include mobility as a service into strategy kind of is also one way kind of to promote mobility as a service locally. Okay, and so of course, as we were doing this research, we couldn't ignore the situation in which we're all in. So we also dedicated some time and space in this report to see how the governance of mobility innovations has been affected by the pandemic. And then we looked at a few responses. Like, we know that, of course, there are a lot of responses related to transportation, but we try to focus only on those changes that affect different mobility innovations that we have been looking at already previously. So, for example, we could see that there has been quite a strong support for active modes in different countries. This kind of manifests itself in creating temporary bike lanes in different cities, opening up spaces on the roads to be used at least temporarily by bicyclists. And that has the effect on all active modes, but in our case it's interesting because it has increased the use of shared bikes or e-scooters, at least in some countries. Then there was kind of a temporary measure to allow free parking in city downtowns in the UK, for example, and that's doesn't have direct impact on mobility innovations, but indirectly it has drawn people to to use cars instead of different shared solutions, so that could be seen as a negative impact. Then we can see that many, or like most of European countries, are coming up with different sustainable recovery plans after the pandemic, and they also include different plans for sustainable mobility. And another interesting observation is that there has been collaboration for traffic monitoring between private and public parties in certain countries, where we can see that, first of all, this kind of collaboration is possible, and there has been more examples of it, and then also this allowed for more data-driven governance, making decisions based on real-time data, which is an interesting indication for how to govern mobility innovations as well. So we have looked at all kinds of responses to COVID-19 that are relevant for mobility innovations. I won't go into this, probably there is no time already, but really briefly we can see that some are some responses have been positive for mobility innovations. For instance, bike and e-scooter sharing has been increasing, and then city respacing strategies changed for more sustainable mobility, at least temporarily, but we see that it could actually stay with us for longer. But some have also been restrictive, and naturally due to the shifting focus on ensuring the safe transportation and just solving everyday problems, there has been some delays in pilots and so on, which will also have some negative effect on certain mobility innovations. Yes, so and in the long term, we see there are some trends. This is probably early to say, but still, there is an indication that authorities start rethinking the role of public transport against mobility services, because in some situations, new mobility services were able to come in and replace the public transport when necessary. Also, there are changes in city space planning, again, reserving more space for walking and biking and delivery, and less for cars. And what's important for our project, I think, is that we see that there is more examples of collaborative governance, of more adaptive, flexible governance that is based on data. And even though this has been applied to address the pandemic, but if these models are with us to stay, then they will also have an effect on how the mobility innovations are governed, because in a way, sometimes they are a similar type of disruption as the pandemic, when something new comes in and changes our mobility systems. Okay, I probably took too much time, so I'm gonna finish at this point. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Anastasia. Does anybody have any questions before we move on? We just wanted to share some of this, just sort of overview of where things stand. I think it's nice just to get that bird's eye view sometimes to sort of see where you fit into that larger context. But if there are any questions, we're happy to take any. You can either raise your hand or just say out loud if you want to. If there's nothing, then I would say we can just move on then. I'll say thank you again, Anastasia, and pass the screen over to Yannick, who's going to give us a little bit of context for our discussion for today.
Yes, you should be able to see my screen now. I'll just put it on full screen. Okay, so very briefly, just to give a bit of background to our workshop and discussions for today, and what this will all be feeding into. So for today, we're looking at some recommendations coming from the project. We're coming up to the end of the Gecko project relatively soon. So we're working on our final outputs of the project, and as part of this, we'll be making what we have called a joint position paper. So this is really some of the final recommendations, final conclusions, final political statements coming from the project. This position paper will then be basically a political statement on EU regulatory approaches related to regulatory schemes, frameworks, and governance models. And these messages will be targeted towards the European institutions. And it will be looking also at this horizon, this future-looking horizon of 2040. So looking at new mobility, future mobility, and for both passenger and freight transport. And what we would like to do with this is also to set also a number of key priorities which should be considered for adaptive and new regulatory frameworks. So what we have done with this so far is, and you have been involved with this work at the moment via the survey which has been ongoing before this workshop. So we have started by collecting a number of political statements, policy recommendations, key conclusions coming from the work in the projects which has taken place. And we have first started by extracting this from our Gecko project reports, which we have made. You have seen some presented throughout this workshop already, and the ones which have taken place already throughout the project, we have gone through these, taken what we have seen to be some of these statements, and then we have put these together and then put this in a survey which the majority of you should hopefully have responded to. So we had 46 responses to this survey already. And in this survey, you see the question on the right-hand side. We asked our stakeholders to either strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, if you're feeling neutral about the statement, or if you somewhat agree or strongly agree with these statements which we have been finding in deliverables. And then the purpose of today then is we will have a discussion and do some work about these statements. Then we have selected the ones where we found to be the most strong agreement with these statements. And we would like to then further discuss this about how can we really reach the goal of these statements, and who should be involved in this also. What are the responsibilities, what are the roles for this, and what is also the role of the European Commission and the European institutions in reaching these statements. So that's what we have planned for the discussion of today. And by that, then I'll already hand over back to Bonnie, because we have also, for some of you who have been involved in the previous days, we have another Miro board prepared for this discussion also.
Thanks, Yannick. Yes, so as noted, if you've been here in the last couple of days, you'll have seen that we're big fans of Miro boards. We find this really helpful way to collect information, and I'm just sharing my screen so you can see the one that we're working with today. And I've also shared the link to this in the chat. So you're welcome to click on this yourself, and you can focus on the areas you want to. I've got the whole view here, so you can see this is the entire board. And this basically is, as Yannick described, the statements that we had, that we put out. And what we've got left here, we looked at the results from you, from the stakeholders that responded to this and came up with these. We have 11 statements that we're down to now, divided into 4 categories. And what we would like to do is just take this one category at a time. And I'll just sort of zoom into the one section we're looking at right now. So we'll just take this one category at a time. And we have 3 general questions for each of these, and what we're trying to do is to fill in as many of these boxes as we can in the time that we've got. So we have, say, between 10 and 15 minutes per box, and I'll just be asking for your inputs to this, and my colleagues will be frantically writing sticky notes and putting them in the relevant boxes. We may follow up with you with questions. If you would like, you're also quite welcome to add sticky notes yourself. It's fairly simple. You can grab one from below and just drop it wherever you want to. You can also right click and wait, I should be able to add a sticky note. Am I wrong? Okay, skip that. I would just say go over here, grab a sticky note from the side, and you can also drop it in. Choose your favorite color. That's completely fine. You can also, if you want to something that's here, add a comment. We had quite a few people doing that yesterday, and we found that really valuable as well. So if there's something that you would like to comment on here, you're more than welcome to do that. So these are the options you have available to you. But at this point, I think I'm just going to start putting some questions out. As noted, we're focusing on private-public cooperation right now, and I'll just give you 1 minute just to look at the sentences yourselves. I'll stop talking for a second so you can concentrate on what the statements are that we're looking at. Okay, I can see your icons dragging around here, flying around on the screen already, which tells me that you've had some time to look at these. I can see you adding comments. Maybe I'll just say, haha. I'll start asking questions to what's here maybe for now with this. Somebody's put the sentence out. So authorities should take a proactive approach to governance of disruptive mobility solutions, including dialogue with private parties developing disruptive mobility innovations so as to be able to direct innovation. So basically authorities being proactive, they're the ones directing the innovation. And politicians are the ones that need to make this happen. Is this at all levels? I'll put the question out to whoever wrote it or anybody else. Is this politicians, are we talking at the local level?
That came from me, yes. I think it's on all levels.
Okay. So maybe we'll add that as well.
Can I guess just
yeah.
I guess, yeah, as a dialogue point, I would, I don't know that I would entirely agree that I think politicians should be responsible for that, just because of the, because a lot of times that, you know, they're only in for a short amount of time. They don't actually fully understand the details and intricacies of transport operations. That's generally what we find is it's much better to work with the ongoing members of the city, and by members I mean employees, you know, the actual transportation officers, as opposed to the politicians who oftentimes unfortunately have random whims and don't necessarily know what they're talking about.
Okay, so maybe if somebody wants to add to the politicians a follow-up note, just put a comment on, that would be great, to say that there are other views, so maybe people within the administration should also be a part of this. Or do you say instead, Krishy, or do you see this as sort of a team thing between the politicians and the administration?
I mean, I think some politicians, you know, can contribute, and obviously they have a platform, but you know, and they can obviously like push for this kind of dialogue, but in terms of them being the deciding factor, I think that's a lot to put on politicians who, again, just might not have the background or the understanding.
Yeah.
I think it depends on which country we are talking about.
Marco, go ahead.
I argued with the perspective of Switzerland, of course, and our laws are done or are written and discussed by politicians, and so that's the reason why I've put it there. So maybe it's different in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, I said the laws, of course, need to be established by politicians. But if they're the ones that are sort of bringing it forward, I'm not sure. I can see the point there, but I think it's good to have this, so both comments here, both sides, so the politician side, particularly local, but the comment based on, we'll say, the experience of somebody as a bike share provider, which I know Kristia is, brings another perspective into that as well. Somebody's put what's preventing us from getting there, and the first one is the legal framework. So what's the issue there? Can I get a little more detail?
That's also from me.
Go ahead, Marco.
I argue from a PTO perspective, and even if I want to collaborate with bike sharing providers, I'm not allowed to. You know, it's not included in our legal framework that I collaborate as a PTO with a bike sharing provider. It's not a reality. I want to, but I can't because I'm not allowed to.
Okay, so then we come back to, then I see your point here as well. The politicians are the ones who are responsible for making, yes. In that context, it all makes sense then. Yeah. I'm fairly certain that's different in other countries, because I know there are examples where the private sector operators are able to collaborate with the public transport operators. So that's certainly one perspective.
This is Sergio. Yeah, I'm driving crazy trying to stick a note, but I don't know why it doesn't react. So yeah, I don't know if there is any way of doing it.
Have you just, if you click on the sticky note?
Yeah, but I click, I select it, and apparently the icon is okay. And then when I click on the dashboard, nothing happens.
Yeah, I'm having the same issue.
Okay, then
it's not just you.
I'm not feeling so silly. Thank you.
Then we'll ask you to just say, what would you like to say, Sergio? Where would you like to put it? We'll just do this out loud.
I mean, I was just starting from the first. From these authorities should take a proactive approach, and I agree. But I think regarding what's preventing us from getting there, I think it's basically the whole process as such. I mean, administrations, authorities have a very kind of slow, complicated way of running. Everything must be very well, say, written and expressed in the legal framework, in local regulations, and that takes really long time. So many times it's just a matter of, you know, being disappointed or discouraged since the very beginning, because it really takes a long time. So many times it's really such a burden that it takes a lot. And I am talking just by the local example of Madrid. The city is working on the new sustainable mobility bylaw, and it takes years to have that sort of legal document that provides the framework that supports all this cooperation. And then who is responsible for making this a reality? I think it's a shared responsibility. On one hand, whatever framework which is above the local one helps a lot. I mean, having any sort of national framework, regional framework, or even European framework, that helps because it provides a guidance. But then once talking about the local scenario, I think it's a shared responsibility by the willingness of politicians and also the willingness to cooperate from the private mobility operators or sometimes even the transport authorities. So that's also linked with the role of the European Commission. I think setting a minimum framework or providing guidance, recommendations may help.
Yeah, it's interesting. So this comes back a little bit to Anastasia's presentation as well of what frameworks are established. And so it sounds like you're saying in some cases there's more needed with regard to guidance or guidelines for cities.
And again, it's linked with the other three questions that you put it there in the dashboard, because many times is this, somebody just put it right now, this lack of trust or distrust. Earlier this morning I was listening some news about the Madrid local context, and the mayor was yesterday promoting a lot of these electric shared mopeds as a tool to promote sustainable mobility in the city. Right now we have 3 different companies operating in the city, and on the paper everything runs very well, but the reality is that as soon as you get into Twitter, you can find thousands of complaints from pedestrians about the lack of proper parking of these motorbikes. They are always in the pathways anyway, and the city council apparently has already set an enforcement procedure and a way to fight against this, but it is not working. So that generates this lack of trust from both sides, and that affects also the deployment of these new mobility services.
Yeah, you've spoken to several issues all at once there, and it's true. The collaboration or the work between the public and the private sector, also enforcement, which is an issue, and how this affects other road users as well.
Yeah, but because everything at the very end, everything starts by ourselves. So if we are civic enough and responsible enough, we should behave, and that that never happens, at least in Madrid.
I can't imagine you're alone.
Yes, I am at home. I'm not at the office.
No, I said you're not alone with your comments.
Okay.
Madrid's not the only place that has issues like that. I'm just watching the frantic filling in here, and I'm also keeping an eye on the time. Would anybody like to? I'm just seeing you're working your way across, I can see, which is great. I'm looking at the 4th column, the comment, the role of authorities to consider the fit between the value proposition of disruptive innovations and new policies or regulatory frameworks. That it sort of sounds like it addresses a little bit what Sergio was talking about. So like, what's the fit? Do these electric mopeds, is that appropriate for your city? Are they providing a service that you want? So it's the authorities who need to decide this. I would say sort of based on their existing policies and frameworks, it would make sense. Does this fit within their sustainable urban mobility plan, for example? You can see somebody starting to put comments in there. Would anybody like to speak to that one? Or again, it's a little bit related, I think, to the first one. So the authorities are the ones that decide. Christian, I'll put this out to you as a private sector stakeholder. Actually, any of the private sector would be happy to hear your responses. Is this the authorities' role, or do you think you could have some influence there?
I mean, I think it's, you know, it's important, obviously, for local authorities to have a vision of what they want for their city. Obviously, that doesn't happen in a vacuum, and that's influenced by, you know, developments in technology and what other places are doing and all that kind of stuff. So I think oftentimes what we often see happening, just very general, you know, we're all planning for, you know, 2050 or 2030 when economies will be you know, at 0 emissions or whatever. And oftentimes the technology doesn't currently exist, but the assumption is that the private sector, the government, whoever will come up with solutions to make that possible. So I think it is the goal. I mean, it's also private sectors. It should be private sector's goals to also be, I suppose, create, working towards that general framework of, look, the goal is generally to reduce emissions and make it safer and make it nicer places to live, kind of thing. So on a general level, I think it's both.
But also to make a profit while getting there. Maybe that's the difference between the private and the public.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, that slightly goes back to the first point. Sorry, I can't add anything. I can't write anything. But it kind of goes back to the first point as well. As I think one of the things that's preventing it is also just general capacity and funding. Again, councils may have funding, but how they decide to spend it or not spend it is obviously differs based on location. And so a lot of times it is a checkbox situation where they're like, okay, we have X. We didn't have to spend any money on it. Great, now we can move on. And so, yeah, it does really require proactive. It requires engagement. It requires work, and it should also require funding. Just going back to, transportation should be funded by the government. I don't think it should be externally funded necessarily. I think that the other point there is, in terms of the distrust point, I think that's it's a really valid point. Partially there will always be negative feedback, and I think it's an aspect of the on-demand social media and all this kind of stuff, which everybody the idea that all of their opinions matter, which I think is a point of debate, but also it's this, I think it's a maybe this is too deep, but a capitalism problem of private sector and government as well, always wanting to talk about success and never about failure. And failure is always a bad thing as opposed to a learning point. And so, we are part, I'm part of in one of our cities where there are scooters, and they have been brought in under the trials. I'm part of that kind of stakeholder meeting group that meets with the city. And for the most part, it's still like very much based on competition. Yes, different stakeholders, outside of the private groups bring complaints there or bring, perspectives and thoughts there. But the competitors themselves, yes, they'll address obviously anything that comes up, but ultimately the face that they are presenting is always this is how we're succeeding. We don't talk about how we're failing because it's a competition. And I think that's what oftentimes is problematic when it's done separately, as opposed to, which I know is hard. And obviously, we're a private company as well, but creating this full level playing field and having complete access to all the data and being able to see actually how it is really performing and trying to take lessons from that, as opposed to just always wanting to be, oh my God, yes, it's a success because we've had, 10 million rides. And
X number, yeah.
Really means success.
Yeah, I know we had this in a discussion. I'm not sure. I think you might have been there, Christian, that Joris Wiederwald from Austria Tech described failure as a short learning curve, I think. So you've learned and moving on from there. And I hate to say it, but speaking of moving on, I would ask you can see these madly writing all over the place, and maybe I'll sort of follow up on some of these, but if I could ask you to move over to the data section and see what you have to say about that. I'll move my screen. I'm hoping or assuming you can see. I just realized the questions on the left are difficult to see when I've got the data questions showing, but those are, it just comes a little bit to what you were just saying, Krisha, as well, with regard to having access to the data and being able to make informed decisions on that. And I know we've got a couple of people that work specifically on data, so it would be interesting to hear maybe from Antoine, if you want to offer some comments here.
Yeah, definitely. I completely second what Christina was saying about the fact that there's no clear metric, or there's two simple metric to base a project or a policy on. And often the metric is ridership, so how many user or person are using the actual transport mode. And it's a bit too simple sometimes because it depends a lot of how many effort have been put in acquisition, marketing, or external events such as COVID. And I think there's a stronger collaboration that can be made between private sector and public sector to actually build new metrics, maybe more social impact metrics. I'm thinking about the territory coverage or even like metrics that are really used in the private sector, such as retention or activation. So how many users are staying and using the transport mode during a month, or what they are continue to using it after a few months.
So does the public sector decide what metrics they want, what data they'd like to have collected, or how do you imagine that?
Yeah, so that we talk about and we define what are the success criteria of a collaboration, for example. So when we start to work with a city or even at the national side, but I think what I have in mind is in terms of local authority, we more how we define the success. What do we want? Do we just want, so, like often it's kind of implicit that what we want is the most number of users using the transport mode, and I think.
But the question is where those come from. If you're taking them from the bus and putting them on a scooter, how helpful is that?
Yeah, exactly. Or are they, or is it sustainable? Is it like just because of prices suddenly low that we have a lot of users trying the mode, or is it something that is actually more sustainable because it actually has a real social impact? It's actually something that really answers mobility need. And of course that all those metrics can be really made, I think, from data. So there's also a question of data collection when I'm looking at the second category, the red category.
Yeah, no, I'm just hearing what you're saying and seeing that you've basically combined all of our categories in one, in a sort of in a statement talking about data collaboration, and I've just slid on my screen over to sustainability, society, and safety to see obviously that these aspects are combined there as well, and that we need new approaches to get there. So as I said, you basically in one or two sentences said all of these things are related, which I guess is not really a surprise, but it's interesting that you can do that, because we started out sort of with this focus on data, but it does come back to the collaboration question again, as it seems everything does. Christophe, can I ask you about your thoughts on the data statements that we have here?
Sure. So far, I have added quite a few notes as well on this. So for me, the most important thing with the vision that I have from the United States and Europe, there are some standards emerging, but there are way too many actually right now. So we need to have someone, and I think the EU can play a role here in line with the different countries and transportation authorities to try to streamline and to define something that would be used not only from micromobility, but maybe micromobility, taxis, ride-hailing, buses, something that is a standard with. I saw some comments on which metrics, and I think there are some good examples and some good things that have been in place already in the US that actually we are also supporting in some cities in France and in London where they are using that kind of standards. So for me, it's clear that it's important that there is one definition or that is standardizing what needs to be shared by the different operators so that everybody can compare the different MSPs, behavior patterns. Otherwise, it's really complicated. So I think that's pretty important, and that I think that EU or an organization, a non-profit supported by the EU may do something like that to have that really in place, and also make it applicable in the different countries. It's not that complicated because I mean the different MSPs they are, for the large part of them, global operators. So if we look at large companies like Uber, where they own Lime as an example, they have micromobility, they have bikes, they have scooters, they have mopeds, and they have cars. it's the same backend, and that kind of data can be, once defined, they're ready to go to share things. But obviously, if there is no authority saying, okay, look, here's what you need to share, we're not looking at the end user, the person who is being carried, or the person that is using the mobility service, but we focus on the vehicle that is actually being used across the city streets. That's what we would like you to share, and somehow, if this is not within the regulation, that big companies will never share. Actually, challengers will, the smaller one will, but not everybody. So that's what I see, and I think in the US we've seen that after 3 years, it's something that is happening, because DOTs have the power actually to say, this is how it's going to work if you want to operate in my city. And in France or in Europe, it's in the UK, it's different. Authorities are like, oh wow, I'm not sure I can ask this. It may be dangerous for different reasons, privacy reason, GDPR. It's not, even though I can demonstrate to them that it's totally GDPR, it's there is no privacy issue. Data may be scary actually. So that's why if something or an entity can actually regulate it in a way that is demonstrating that there is no GDPR problem, no privacy things, because we are only asking for that, and then it's into the regulation. I think it can work. But clearly there is a need of a regulation, and I think EU has to play a big role here.
So this is what you see. So basically, this is, if I'm looking at this bottom box here, is the role for the EU. It is in starting to establish those regulations. It's interesting sort of where the power sits, and you say some departments of transportation in the US have the power to do that. I sort of see that to a certain extent, or I would say I do see it in London with Transport for London, that can certainly put out their requirements, and private operators of, we'll say, individual bus lines know that they have to follow those if they want to get those contracts. So it sounds like maybe in the larger cities it works, but maybe in the smaller ones, they certainly do not have that power.
Correct.
And so the question is how you would transfer what works in a larger city maybe to a smaller one.
Bonnie, can I comment there in that case? So,
yeah, Andrew, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, so it's quite clear that the institutional framework, which we see in large or small cities, has a major impact on innovation and ability to address these multi-sectoral challenges. So the simple issue of emission-related charging involves both transport and the environment. And where you have that siloed mindset because of the institutional framework, then those cross-sectoral issues will face challenges. In London has a unitary authority. It's actually part of the mayor's office, which addresses that very well. In Singapore, it's exactly the same. The LTA does a great job there. In Hong Kong, it tends to be more siloed, and therefore the cross-sectoral things don't work very well. In Cambridge, it's much smaller. That's home of innovation, and there's much more push towards pushing technology and innovation up front and let the business case follow. So it is quite clear that just with that mix from Asia and Europe and the UK city frameworks, it has a much greater impact than I think we could imagine. If you look at the application of maths in the rural environments, then despite best practice in the local city, if the business case doesn't work, again, maths won't work either. So that's where we need the institutional framework is not enough, because then we need the actual business model. And the business models tend to be developed in areas where there is the most likelihood of any business model working. So, for example,
the urban areas.
Yes, so therefore, like high-speed rail always works between the two most popular cities in any country, but doesn't go much further than that typically. Yeah. And the same as shared mobility, often it works in the cities where there's high level of, let's say, of innovation adoption, like London, New York are two cities where shared mobility has been implemented. And I think that actually caught the authorities by surprise, because when you push for convenience, you also increase usage. And having increased usage is not always a good thing, because then that drives congestion. So that then results in having the need to make it more difficult for people to access services. So you get many of these counterintuitive things.
They swung one way and then back again. Yeah.
So therefore, the counterintuitive thinking doesn't really suit those authorities that are just starting to understand, like you see in sub-Saharan Africa, you know, where they're facing these basic challenges, and they put in place these frameworks that are not scalable, again, in the long term. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and I do push back when I hear views which assume a very homogeneous institutional environment, because in practice it doesn't actually work that way. That's all from me.
Do you just, can I follow up with that, Andrew? The differences, do you see this as cultural differences from, say, Asia to Europe to North America, or is this big city, small city differences? Or I'm just wondering, like, so what are the categories around those differences?
I think culture can sometimes explain it. So, for example, the concept of devolution in the UK, it does actually provide a framework for the election of mayors. There's enough support for a mayor, and a mayor satisfies the need of having a so-called champion. And a champion is often the prerequisite for any innovation, particularly in controversial areas like congestion pricing. In areas which are less controversial, have less impact on user behavior, then innovations can actually propagate more readily, because you have a choice of adopting this or not. But if you're implementing, let's say, ID card schemes, which we do not have in the UK, but you have in other parts of Europe, then that can face a lot of pushback, and because culturally the UK has never had ID cards, and therefore any innovation which tends to link identification with an attribute can also face the same concerns. So it's not just cultural. I see certainly in the UK that surveillance concept that you also observe in China. The number of cameras per capita is very similar.
Yeah, I'm sort of laughing because I think in Germany has ID cards, but the idea of CCTV is absolutely unacceptable here. So there's like this contradiction, and the UK has no ID cards, but CCTV is completely fine. So it's hard to even understand what it's, you know, not even a culture of privacy versus not. It's just sort of what people are accustomed to.
Well, then it's about security versus liberty. The UK is more about security as opposed to monitoring user behaviour. So I think it is cultural, but I do not see difference between Asia and Europe. They're still seeing the same level of diversity. And I quote as many examples from here in Asia as I could from Europe.
Okay, no, that's good to know that it's sort of the culture as in an Asian culture versus European, but there seems to be differences. And I think what that says for us is that anybody that's potentially or considering regulations needs to also ask themselves the questions about what kind of city or country they are. Maybe we sort of need, I don't know if there are categories of that, but to try and understand what their local context is, or at least be consciously aware of their local context to think how that might fit with the services they're considering.
Yeah, but I mean, there's the starting points. You certainly see things like, let's say, shared transport. I think it's one of the greatest innovations that we've seen in 50 years, and but it's had both favourable and adverse consequences.
Yep.
But that grew up in environments which enabled that to happen, and then deployed in environments where it wasn't really understood what the impact would be. So again, it's about diffusion of innovation can actually explain why some things work in some areas but fail in others. So for example, Stockholm's implementation of congestion charging faced a lot of pushback in Gothenburg, whether it's the same cultural background, the same regulatory background. It's at the city level, it's culturally very different.
Yeah, I think there were other issues involved in that as well. Part of it was the way that it was communicated too, but
yes.
Yeah, that's another thing.
So a lot of factors, and I guess you just roll the dice to see what comes out in some cases. So maybe the question is, why did it work there but not here? Maybe that's a better way of looking at this, rather than actually develop a framework that can be used everywhere.
Yeah.
So there is another perspective that we should use.
That's a fair comment. I'm just seeing. Yeah, Yannick's having trouble here, which is completely understandable, trying to figure out where to put things on the board. And some of these, maybe I'll just suggest to my colleagues is taking notes where we can at the moment, and then we'll place things afterwards. We're trying to follow and keep track of things at the same time and put things in the various spots. I'd just like to draw everybody's attention over to the right side, looking at the approaches, and maybe I'll even just say the sustainability, society, and safety. If there are comments to those aspects, maybe we'll sort of take them all at the same time, or feel free to add comments there. Lewis, we haven't heard too much from you from Singapore. I'd be interested to know about, say, the new regulatory approaches and your perspective.
Okay, hi. Yeah, because I've been taking notes for everybody's talking about, and I'm just refer back when I first started car sharing here in Singapore, or even in China and different countries, I mean, in different parts of the world. I think one of the fundamentals, the difficulties they have is they don't really understand how the game is being played. When they don't know how the game is being played, how are they going to set the rules, right?
You're talking about the public sector now, those who set the rules?
Both. I mean, right
Okay.
now, public sector want to set the rules,
yeah,
but they don't know how the game is being played. You know, so what kind of rules can we come up with? Because at the end, they also don't want to kill the service. All right, and then so of course everybody wants sustainability. They want to make sure the service is able to continue. You know, because it's a back slap to the politicians or anybody when the service failed, and because nobody is going to risk their so-called career, their political career, over this kind of things. I mean, let's be real about this kind of things, right? So I think where I'm coming from is like, I mean, different countries, I do agree just now that different countries have different needs and different adaptations to it. But I think at the end of the day, we have to understand politicians are never innovative. We're going to help them to be innovative. We're going to help see what are the things, because they are not going to risk their political career over your things. Yeah,
okay,
because they
some
want to
will,
be re-elected.
but yeah, fair enough. Many won't.
Yeah, so I think these are facts of the matter. I don't know. I mean, that's what I've seen through when I'm doing things in Asia. Yeah, so yeah, so these are things that if anybody want to introduce service, this is something they have to consider. Yeah.
Mm. I'm just thinking about the sustainability, society, safety aspects, and also things that you've talked about, Lewis, in the past. That who's setting the goals, and the cities are the ones that say this is what's important to us, and we say, for example, safety standards, guaranteeing overall safety. And I know, Krisha, you've talked about this as well in the past too. This, of course, this needs to be the top priority. If I put this question out, just looking at the sustainability, society, and safety, is there anything preventing us from achieving that? I'm looking at the first one in the yellow.
Of course, the safety standard is something that all about, I mean, that one, I think we have to, I think all regulations will take that as their top priority, because any life that's being affected, they don't want to, I mean, they don't want this kind of things to happen. Like Singapore's case, I mean, right now they're taking a very hard stand on the e-mobility itself, because a couple of injuries has been taken place. So right now they're putting a very hard stand because they don't want further casualties. At the end of the day, the policy making and all this has to take those into considerations, you know, to minimize casualties, make sure they are to safe. And I think right now one of the debating point is how are we going to balance between the walking space, e-mobility space, and the car?
When you say e-mobility, you're talking about things like scooters, electric bikes, electric mopeds, and so on. Yeah, so the micro-mobility, we'll say.
Yeah, because right now they are not allowed to be on the road. And if they are going, in Singapore's case, they are not allowed to be on the road, because to them, if you want to be on the road, you need to pass the so-called the road safety test.
Okay.
Yeah, so right now they are even looking at whether the bicycle people have to go and take the road safety test.
Can I take this over to Sergio then, just bringing, because you talked about the electric mopeds in Madrid. Apparently they're being parked on the sidewalks. Are they also being ridden there, or do they ride on road space? Is the same, do you have the same issue of space and safety in Madrid?
Yeah, indeed, we do have it. I mean, apparently they should comply with certain requirements. It is very clear in the sustainable mobility bylaw. Well, not the new one, but the former one, how to park mopeds or any motorbike on the sidewalks. Apparently, I mean, the city decided last 1st of January, they launched a new way of enforcing. So the same inspectors for the car parking are entitled to fine mopeds and motorbikes and e-scooters which are wrongly parked on the sidewalks. And I think there's been quite a big number of fines so far, but still the problem remains. So it's something which is not really solved. But the figures are quite high. I mean, the number of fines that have been issued trying to enforce proper parking.
And those are, assuming those are shared vehicles, who pays the fine? The person that was riding it, or the
company?
The company.
Yeah, the mobility company.
Okay, so they certainly
I
have
don't know. I
interest.
mean, to be honest, I don't know how many of them, after all the legal procedure, are paid or not, because I assume that these mobility operators may have some sort of legal action against the fine, like, you know, assuming that the driver didn't behave or whatever. Because the truth is that when you open their apps and when you see on the media, they are constantly reminding how to behave and how to park those devices. So I don't know really if they start an illegal procedure against the fine, but at least as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, there's been quite a big number of these fines so far.
Yeah, understandably. Then just this question of if it comes back to the user who has abandoned their vehicle somewhere. I'm wondering in these questions, I'm just looking at the sort of the bottom line here with the new regulatory approaches and the sustainability, society, safety. We've got, I'm just coming back to the EU stuff in this. It all sounds quite local what we're talking about. And I'm wondering if anybody has any thoughts about what the EU role should be in the sorts of things that we're talking about. Is this, again, guidelines, or is there something else the EU should be doing? Antoine?
Yeah, I think definitely on the safety side and our environment as well. I think this should be something where local authorities and national authority can actually agree on. And something has been made, I think, at the European level. I'm thinking about food or the industry where things are regulated at this level. For the social impact, for me, it's really about on what base have the politicians been elected. You know, is it about equality? Is it about access to job? So for me, the social impact should really be local and be clear with the collaboration. Because like the same transport mode can actually be used to help different objectives, social impact objectives, you know, and I think the European Commission or European level can actually say and explain how this transport mode can actually help this social impact, but at the end, it's the local authority's job to choose which social impact it want to prioritize. And so yeah, that's how I see it.
Yeah, and I think somebody else said sort of at the beginning, even knowing what they want, basically having their own goals and being able to measure it as well too, to say, or to know what success is. Maybe it was even you that said that, Antoine. You have to know what you want in order to understand that you've been successful in achieving it.
Yeah. And I think that's good with a strong collaboration and honestly, those things takes time. Like we've seen, like for example, in carpooling in France, it's evolving. It's continuously evolving. You know, there's an error in how we understand stuff. Stuff qualities in with cities, but by every time we're understanding, we're able to define better and better goals. So and hopefully, for example, those kind of learning can be shared with other cities in France or other countries. I'm thinking about there's a subsidies framework in France for carpooling, and there's something that doesn't exist in other countries. For example, in Belgium, I've been talking like on a private side with some person in Belgium actually to put in place some kind of subsidies for carpooling and actually looking at what France is doing, and it's really interesting because in that case it's the framework was built by the French government, but it's used by local authorities. So the transport authority of some region or some cities actually collaborating with this framework.
Mm-hmm.
And in Belgium, I know that they're looking at that to implement it on the national side, on the regional side, sorry, but for the use of cities, Flanders City, for example.
Yeah.
But
sort of comes this learning and the process questions that you're also addressing. How can we take what is being done in France, for example, as a good practice example and maybe transfer to other places, other than the fact that you happen to be in France and you're Belgium and you can take these things?
Yeah,
it seems like a little bit of sort of more random than you would like it to be. This ability to learn across different
definitely, yeah. But
countries.
I think this learning the technical side actually can be very broad. I think the technicalities can be exactly the same on the whole European country level. Maybe I'm thinking about how data are processed, how data are defined, like what information needs to be in the data, but then how it should be analyzed and used by local authorities is different. I think it should be really the information should be very broad at the upper level, national or European, and how it's analyzed and really how decisions are made using those data. Should be
the data question is really interesting. We had part of this discussion yesterday, and this we talked about sharing of data, and then we basically came to the simple question: define sharing, define data. And I'm wondering, is that because we all talk about data and it's sort of this big kind of thing, but does anybody have sort of clearly listed categories of data and what could or should be shared at different points? I mean, is there a role for the EU? I'm just thinking in the definition of different forms of data and how it could be shared.
So in terms of data, I think what it is the only thing that should be shared, the trips, transport. So where and when did someone move, and where to? And I think the rest is only for the private sectors, like product analysis and analysis like that. In terms of sharing, what is share? Like we
Or I guess maybe to put this in context, let's say yesterday when we were talking, the idea of sharing. So for example, if part of your business model is that you want to share, sell your data to the public sector, is that also considered a form of sharing, or is sharing an exchange? Or we just got into this discussion of people may be talking about different things. They say, I'm happy to share my data, but it'll cost you money.
Yeah, for me, sharing should be free in the sense that it's helping the whole sector, and it's also answering. It's a requirement to actually be able to use public goods such as roads or pavements for parking, for example. So for me, it's clear that by sharing data, you're actually getting something in return as a private public provider, transport provider. Sorry. But the sharing the data should be kept to a minimum, and this minimum for me is only the transportation.
Because of privacy concerns, is that what you mean with the minimum of data, or
because is the only thing public authority needs to know to understand how and in where the citizens are moving. And yeah, privacy concern, but like as a public provider, we also have as a private provider, so we also have privacy concern that we follow. So it's
of course, yeah. So the GDPR applies to you.
Exactly.
So
the same time, but yeah.
You would provide the cities then with the data that they need to understand how the service is being used.
Yeah, and how the citizens are moving around. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess we have more information about the user than cities, but I don't think that's something that cities or region need to know per se.
I'd love to hear a city's opinion on that. If we've got Marco, I know you're not the city, but you are the public transport operator in Bern. I'm curious about your thoughts.
Difficult question. Actually, we are right now I mean, we have 3 levels. We have the national level, the cantonal level, and the city level. And public transport is ordered by the cantonal level in Switzerland. And so we are completely orientated to the canton, but actually we are owned by the city. So we are in a kind of a triangle, and it's quite difficult because the bike sharing system, for example, is that there was a tender for the fleet managers, and that the tender was done by the city. So now we have two different levels of authorities that we have to handle. And when it comes to sharing in the city, it's a city thing. It's not a cantonal thing, and neither a national thing. So we actually have to push forward the city to act as a besteller, as a how to say, from a financial perspective, that they are going to finance like multimodal solutions in the city, and it's not the canton, it's the city, but they are not there yet. So it's a bit different than in other countries or big cities probably here in Switzerland. It's a difficult question.
Yeah, I guess maybe the point would be, though, certainly what I hear from you is that the different levels of government make it challenging. I'm just going to we've only got a couple more minutes. I can't believe the time is gone. Vasilis, yeah?
Yeah, I just want to say about what you discussed here. I think this is a reality with the transport systems. Even in France, in many cases, you have the prefectures that decide on they are the transport authorities. And we see more and more around Europe that I think they do this as a way to try to have a more holistic approach to transportation. And you can see this in many countries, some more formally, officially, some less. But here it comes the notion, of these different levels of governance. I try to write some comments about this. About who does what. I mean, the Commission has certain limitations. They cannot impose, apparently, to member states what they have to do. Yep. They can give, principally, from what I have understood, regulatory frameworks that then each state has to translate to their own characteristics. And then within each state, either you have cantons, or if you have prefectures, you have a further delegation to be able to better meet the local requirements. And this is the sort of subsidiarity, right, principle that dominates, I think, the whole structure and governance of the EU. I don't know if you have noticed with the drones, the cities of the initiative I'm leading have published the multi-level governance of the urban sky, exactly to highlight this diversity and variety and the need for this collaboration between different authorities. And the role, in fact, that has to have, because I wrote also another comment there, there is some heritage regulatory approach. If you take the aviation, the airspace is a national space. So local authorities cannot have a say. But this is heritage of aviation. That these are international rules from after the Second World War. Today things have evolved. So we need to evolve also these even binding rules, as you say, that are at an international level. But it's not so obvious how this can happen.
So this is true. This comes back to even to what Anastasia said at the very beginning, that you need to adapt these existing frameworks that have been around for a long time for the new circumstances.
But this adaptation is not, like a digital adaptation or like a digital adaptive network. It can take years.
and this is, I think, what we're noticing too, and this is part of this is the whole process of going through this. That obviously plays a role as well. I can see we're at our time right now. It is 11:30. The conversations always go by really quickly, and I'd love to keep going, but I do want to respect the time because I know that a lot of people plan their meetings back to back these days. That's how it works. If by chance, though, you do have a couple more minutes, I would say we will end the meeting, but we would be very pleased to have, with the Miro board is still here, and you're free to add, and we'd be grateful if you could add any other comments that you have, particularly the new regulatory approaches, where I see there's very comparatively little at the moment.
Bonnie, sorry, I have to go, but
I
the
knew,
Miro
yeah.
board will be open, right?
Yes, the Miro board is open, and in fact, I'll send the link to everybody so you have it yourselves, and we'd be grateful if you could put any final comments in there that you would like to add. So I'll send that to everybody.
Is also the Miro from Tuesday still open? We can add some comment there?
Yes, it's also there. Yeah,
okay,
I think I sent you the link to that. I'll make sure that I
Yes,
did, though.
I do have. I just wanted to know if it is still applicable.
Okay, super. Yes, it's still accessible. That's great. Thanks,
Okay,
Vasilis.
thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And I'll say, I guess, to everybody else, these discussions always end far too quickly. And I don't even see that I can possibly wrap it all up other than to say that the connection among all of these categories is pretty clear. We're trying to sort of pick them apart as much as we can, but I know that's a little bit artificial, and some of the comments that apply in one section probably could also be applied in others as well, and the relationships between them. So I'll just say right now, thank you again for taking the time and sharing your brains with us. The exchange is always interesting. It's nice to hear the different perspectives. So we're happy to see that there are comments here and also comments on the comments. As noted, we'll leave the board open, and I'll send you the link to the board so that you have that for yourself as well. And we've invited all of you to a wrap-up session this afternoon, which is where we're going to bring together all the input that we got on the 3 different days so far. This is the 3rd of our 3 days. And so if you'd like to hear a little bit of a summary of what we come up with, then we'll be doing that at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and you should already have the link to that session. So thank you again very much. We appreciate you taking the time and joining the discussion, and perhaps we'll see you this afternoon or this evening if you're in Asia. And I'll call it a wrap for today. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Okay.
Bye,
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Sergio.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank
If
you.
we're not able to attend the meeting this afternoon, will we be able to see, have a peek of the content of it? Like a slides or something?
For this afternoon, those are being developed right now because it's all based on what happened in the last couple of days. So I know that this is what Yannick is going to be doing this afternoon before then, is trying to put this together a little bit, and also the session from yesterday and the one on conflicting interests that we had on Tuesday as well. So there will be some slides put together, I think, for that, but they're
Okay. Just in the future, I'll be interested to know what has been said and conclude from this afternoon session and those 2 days. Just in case you have some document in mind. And thank you for inviting me.
Our pleasure. Thanks for coming, Antoine.
And have a good afternoon, a good evening.
You too. Okay. Bye-bye. Okay. I guess I can stop sharing. Yeah, same as always, so much to say.